Hi, friends. I'm so happy to welcome you here today. My name is Dorie Clark, and I am here on behalf of Newsweek. And today we are speaking with Seth Godin, and we are going to be talking about the important question: how do you succeed at creative work? And what does success really mean? Well, oftentimes success is actually just about doing the work. And Seth is the author of the new book, The Practice. He is a legendary marketer. We're so happy to have him. Seth, welcome.
Thank you, Dorie. It's always a pleasure. Just one correction. We're not here on behalf of Newsweek. Newsweek is here on behalf of us.
That's right. We are so glad to be able to have this conversation, and especially to welcome all of the folks who are tuning in live. If you are here, we want to see and hear who you are. So please type into the chat box where you're calling in from. We'd love to see what's on your mind, and we will be taking questions from you for Seth. So feel free at any point to type them into the chat box. So Seth, you have written many books over the years. I have a couple of props here. Here's an oldie but goodie, The Icarus Deception. I've got another one. We have
the limited edition, letterpress edition.
That's right. You know, we get OG street cred here. But one of the important questions that we're talking about now with the practice, the subtitle, of course, is Shipping Creative Work. So many people want to be doing creative work. I mean, this is a preoccupation that people have, that they want to be creating their own thing, starting their own thing. And yet many people are really held back from doing it. What is going on? Is it a self-esteem issue, or why do so many people want to embark on this and yet they don't get started, or maybe they start but quit?
Yeah, what a trap. So every podcast begins with no listeners. Every blog begins with no readers. I met Dorie Clark when she had published exactly 0 New York Times bestsellers. You show up and then the work happens. You don't wait until you get picked. You don't wait until you get a guarantee. You simply begin. And if you begin with the mindset of who can I hustle and how do I get my share, no one wants to hear from you. But if you begin by saying there's a door to be opened, a light to be turned on, people to be connected, then you are greeted eagerly by a few people. And a key part of my message is we don't need the biggest possible audience. We need the smallest viable audience. And it turns out the internet is not a mass medium. It is a micro medium. It is a collection of micromedia. And there's never been a better moment to show up, but you can only show up with a practice. You don't show up with a guarantee.
I think that's a really important point, Seth. And one of the ways that you have paved the way for this is in your own work. You are a regular blogger. Here, in fact, is the URL for Seth's.blog. And by regular, I mean every day for years, which is kind of stunning. Can you talk a little bit about your thoughts on the questions of just repetition and how that factors in of just doing things every day? Can anybody do that? Should everybody do that?
So the practice is based on a workshop that I built. So between the workshop and the book, it took 3 years, called the Creatives Workshop. And the reason the Creatives Workshop changed people's lives is because we built streaks into it. I believe in streaks. So today is Thursday. I think last time I checked, it's more like Blur's Day, but let's say it's Thursday. Tomorrow morning, there's going to be a blog post from me, and it won't be there because it's the best blog post I ever wrote. It will be there because it's tomorrow. And I decided once to have a streak. And since I already decided, I don't have to renegotiate with myself. It's not up for discussion. Tomorrow, there's going to be a post. The idea of having a streak, and it doesn't have to be every day, that's how you become who you seek to become. You're not a runner because the New York Roadrunners picked you. You're a runner because you go running every day. And that idea of saying, this is what I do, this is my practice, opens the door toward better.
Thank you, Seth. That's great. And I'd love to just recognize some of the terrific people who are here joining us live. We have Rajan from India. We have Jan from Iowa. We have Diana from Newport. We've got Jeff from Calgary. Oh my gosh, Jefferson from Los Angeles. We have Janet from Houston, Phyllis from Sarasota. Look at all this. This is great. We have Travis from Spokane. He says he's an Alt MBA alum. So welcome, Travis. Alt MBA, of course, is a wonderful program that Seth runs. We've got Sasha from North Vancouver and Hall from Atlanta. We're so happy to have you guys here. And please feel free to start typing your questions for Seth into the chat box. Now, Seth, one of the things that I think is an important theme that I wanted to tease out in your work is you speak a lot about the question of having generosity in the work that you do. And that's a frame you don't necessarily hear a lot. What do you mean by that, and why is that important?
So generous doesn't mean free, and generous doesn't mean trading favors, and generous doesn't mean you have to give it away. Generous is the emotional labor we do to help somebody get to where they ultimately are glad they got. It's the opposite of manipulation. And, you and I have now known each other for a decade or so. And if someone were to ask me what word comes to mind when I think of Dorie Clark, it would be generous. Because you're playing an infinite game, not a finite game. You're not showing up saying, how do I win this round? You're showing up saying, how do I get to keep playing? And it's that infinite game, which Simon just brought back into the vernacular, that's so important, because what better game to play than a game we get to keep playing?
I think that's really powerful. Thank you for that, Seth. And we had a great question come in. We have one of our readers wanting to know, what about the balance between creativity and accountability, as you need some results from the creative work? How do you think about that tension, or is it a tension?
We're doing the work to make change happen. If no change happens, the work did not succeed. The results do matter. Now, if you are in the business of making a bridge or a pacemaker, all that matters is the results. You don't get to say to someone who dropped dead because of a defect in the pacemaker, well, yeah, but I was being creative. That doesn't work. But most of us don't make pacemakers, and most of us don't make bridges. What we make is something that might not work, and what we make is something that might not be for everyone. So if we obsess about the outcome while we are doing the work, we are giving away agency to this amorphous cloud. And what I'm arguing is the best results come from focus on the practice. After the work is done, the single best way to learn if we did a good job is to watch what happens when it interacts with the market. If it interacts with the market and it fails, we learn something. If it interacts with the market and it succeeds, we learn something. The question is, what do we learn? So if we think about Lou Reed and Take a Walk on the Wild Side, Lou Reed was an edge case punk rocker, and then Wild Side became a huge hit. So what does he learn from that? Does he learn that every song he does should be like that one? Or does he learn that the fickle finger of fate pointed to him, he got lucky about one thing, and it opens the door for him to go back to serving the audience he sought to serve? So we have to be really clear about what accountability even means. And I am not saying, I have never once said, you are entitled to succeed with whatever pops into your head. What I'm saying is, if you have empathy for your audience, if you understand your genre, the best way forward is to forget about winning in the short run and instead to engage in the practice that takes you on a long-term journey to do the work, learning from the audience, the right audience, as you go.
That's a really important point. And if you are watching this and you are enjoying the conversation, please go ahead and click like and click share so that your colleagues and friends can benefit from it as well. If you want to learn more about Seth Godin's work, his website is sethgodin.com. If you'd like to make sure that you never miss one of these weekly Newsweek interviews, you can sign up for my email list and get a free self-assessment at dorieclark.com. So, Seth, we have some other terrific questions that have been coming in from our viewers, and I think there's some excellent ones here. So, Let's see. This is from Mike, and Mike wanted to know, after all your time in business, you've done a lot of different things. You were the founder of a company which you sold to Yahoo at the beginning of the .com era. You have written many, many best-selling books. But after all your time in business, is there something about marketing or consumer behavior that still perplexes you? Do you feel like there's some mysteries out there for you that you still rattle around in your mind?
Everything about marketing and consumer behavior mystifies me. The list is super long, but why does the amount of money we spend on dog food keep going up even though the dogs are no happier? Why do people keep making decisions that hurt them, not just in the long run, but in the short run? Why is it so easy to divide people who would be better off connected? Why do people pay extra for something that doesn't work as well as the thing they could easily get? And it goes on and on. There are very few interesting questions in accounting. There are very few interesting questions in operations research. There are very few interesting questions in how we figure out the technology of a traditional off-the-shelf computer chip. But there's nothing but interesting questions in marketing that I will look at a campaign the day it comes out and I'll say, that's going to work, and I'll be wrong, or vice versa. It's still a mystery. And we're just beginning to understand that marketing is a reflection of humanity, and humanity is super complicated because culture is easy to change. Culture is our external DNA, and we keep rewiring it. And that system is super unstable.
Yeah, that's a great point, Seth. And a related question about changes in your thinking or ways that your thinking has evolved. One of our friends joining us on LinkedIn wanted to know the answer to this question. Has anything evolved in your thinking or your practice as a result of the pandemic? How are you doing things differently, if at all? I guess probably going out a little bit less, but how are you doing things differently as compared to before these crazy times?
Okay, well, first, for people who have been ill or who are economically uncertain, for people who have borne the brunt of racial injustice and who are feeling trauma around all of the insecurity in our lives, just know that you're seen, and my heart goes out to you. And so it's just to have it be so widespread. There's always been things in the world that haven't worked for people, but rarely at the same time. And it has been a wake-up call for a lot of people about what is worth doing, how much time do we have to do it, and how do we do it better. In my case, it ranges from the prosaic to the deep. I pointed out to my wife that I've slept in the same bed every night for 200 days. That's the first time that's happened since I was 7 years old. I don't miss getting on airplanes. I haven't booked one gig for the post-vaccine world because while it was an incredible 30-year run of 1,000 talks, maybe I need to take a deep breath and think about that. Akimbo, the business I built over the last 5 years with an extraordinary team of people, I don't own it anymore. I don't run it anymore. It's a B Corp, independently run and owned by the people who run it. And we pioneered what online learning can be. And Akimbo needs to be an institution bigger than me. And taking a deep breath and seeing that I need to get back to staring at a blank wall and trying to figure out the next thing was liberating, freeing, and thrilling all at the same time, because we need to dig deep into why are we going to do this work tomorrow, because we do have choices. And I'm hoping that this reset will be a reset, not because we're going to go back to normal, but because we can recalibrate that more is not the answer, that we don't need another self-storage unit, that we don't need more debt. That maybe what we need is better. And I'm hopeful, not optimistic, but hopeful that we'll get the message.
Yeah, thank you for that, Seth. We had a question come in from Jane on the pandemic theme. She wants to know, we're all on Zoom, we're all on StreamYard. How do you, Seth, think about building solid relationships when we, at least at this point, pre-vaccine, oftentimes have to be doing it through a computer screen?
Yeah, so we could talk about this all day. So let me try for just a few minutes. One of my closest friends lives in Melbourne. She used to live in Perth. Bernadette and I corresponded for 5 years before we met each other. The number of people who are getting married because they found each other online keeps going up. That every generation says that the new thing isn't going to get where it promises. That when we lived on farms and we went to the city, people, this is true from Clay Shirky, were so disoriented by it that they didn't have coffee carts going up and down the hallways in Manchester, England. They had gin carts. That people were so disoriented from 12 hours in a factory, they basically drank all day to get through the day. Zoom is being misused dramatically. The amount of spam in the world is out of control. But real relationships are forming online. Somebody asked on Akimbo, my podcast, about would it be possible for something like the Beatles to have occurred if they had lived now. And I think it's extremely likely that musical innovations, creative innovations are going to be coming out fast and furious from people who have never met. Because these interactions can be richer than bumping into someone in the supermarket. I have neighbors who I've said hello to every week for 20 years who I don't know at all. Because physical proximity isn't the point. It's emotional proximity. But to do that, we have to extend ourselves. We have to figure out, where do we feel safe? How do we bring mutual generosity to the table and engage with people that we would miss if they were gone? And, I did a blog post a while ago about instant yes. And so if there's an email in my box from Dorie Clark, I don't have to read it. Instant yes. Because there's a connection there, and it's not based on the fact that you're my next door neighbor, because you're not.
Yeah, it's such a good point, Seth. Thank you for that. So a question that I had that was related, and just a reminder for our listeners that if you are enjoying this, please hit like, please hit share so more people can benefit from Seth's wisdom. But so something that I was wondering about, Seth, as kind of a mantra throughout your work, you often use the phrase, "this might not work." What does that mean, and why is that so critical to your philosophy?
So Henry Ford changed the world, and Frederick Taylor helped him with a stopwatch, with a factory, measuring to the second how long it takes and how much it costs to make a thing. Industrialism worked. It paved the earth. Industrialism is about results and only results. And so we built school in its image. If you are defective, we put you back a year and we reprocess you. And we test you to make sure you meet spec. And we ask the question, will this be on the test? What does that question mean? Not, is it worth learning, but will you be finding out if I meet spec? Because if not, I'm not going to bother. All of those things have pushed us into saying, if it's not going to work, it's not worth doing. And that's how you eliminate creativity. Because by definition, work that is creative might not work. That's what makes it creative work. That's why it is not the same as hauling a truckload of cement across town, because that is important, but that is cog work that should be done by the cheapest available person. Creative work is human work that might not work. And if you can tell yourself, I'm doing this with a practice, with a spirit of generosity, understanding the genre, having looked at what has come before, and it still might not work, but I'm going to do it anyway, now you're onto something.
I think that's such an interesting point, Seth. And in some ways, it reminds me of sort of a parallel. The people in science often say, if a particular thing is not falsifiable, then by definition, it is not science. And similarly, it sounds like if something, if there is not the potential for something to fail, then it is not creative work. Is that true?
Yes. And you said one of my trigger words, which is falsifiable. So we need to explain it to the listeners at home.
Please.
If you say the earth was invented by aliens and it's made out of blue cheese. However, the aliens are really, really smart. And no matter what experiment you do, they will be able to trick you into thinking that the world is not made out of blue cheese. That's not science, because there is no circumstances under which I can prove you wrong. And if you cannot be proven wrong, that is belief, and belief is important, but let's not pretend it's science. And the world advances when we say things or propose things that could be proven to be incorrect. That is important. So many people who say they do science, like in white coats and everything, aren't actually doing science. They're just doing rote. Real science is doing an experiment where you're not sure of the outcome. And the same thing is true with any creative act. I am not sure that my blog post tomorrow will resonate with you. Can't be, because it's never been written before. And that's delightful. I'm thrilled for that. And the same thing is true with that painting or that show at that gallery, or that would make a list of anything you want that makes things better. If it's got a chance to make things better and it hasn't been done before, I'd like to call that a creative act of art, but it's got to sit with the falsifiability of it might not work.
Love that, Seth. Thank you. Special shout out to your bookcase. Elliot says he's in love with it. So props for the very nice background. And we had a question come in from Greg. Greg is actually a member of my Recognized Expert course and community, and also Alt MBA. So he's in both of our worlds. Thanks for this, Greg. And Seth, maybe you can explain this a little bit more. Greg is alluding to something that you mentioned on one of your great podcast episodes. Seth runs a wonderful podcast. I am a subscriber, called Akimbo. But can you talk a little bit about queuing theory and what that is? And as Greg says, is this the secret to everything? Please explain.
It's probably not the secret to everything, but first, one little bonus for readers. Hold on. 25 years ago, somebody needed to invent emojis. And it wasn't quite me, but it was close because I wrote the book about them. Hard to believe.
Amazing.
Anyway, no, it's not the answer to everything. Queuing theory turns out that there's some very simple, sophisticated, but simple math that lets us understand why it takes so long at the bank and how there's a vaccine coming. How do you make it so that more people get the vaccine in the shortest period of time? There's lots of interesting problems to be solved when we need to take a parade of things, people, or whatever, and put them through a small hole in a parade. And the point of the podcast was to show that the internet blew that up in many ways, because it used to be, for example, that your travel agent could only book one trip at a time. But now that a computer does it, 10,000 people can buy an airplane ticket at the same time, and the thing doesn't fall apart. And a lot of the innovation in our lives, good and bad, has happened because the rules of queuing theory were replaced. That the New York Times homepage has a finite amount of room for articles, but Twitter does not. So there is no queue there. Anyone can publish, and anyone will. And that's why there's so much noise in the world. I think the answer to the world's problems is peer-to-peer compassion to make things better, 10 people at a time, in a contagious way. Because that's the way we create problems, and that's the way we solve them.
That's really powerful. Thank you, Seth. And we had a question come in. I love this because Todd is probably not the only one. Todd, who's actually going to be a guest himself on this show
Hi, Todd.
On December 31st. He says, I've read almost all your books, but if somebody hadn't read them, what's one that would be a good starting point?
So we haven't talked at all, I don't remember, about the smallest viable audience, but the internet's not a mass medium, it's a micro medium, it's a collection of that. And while I believe my 20 books rhyme with each other and have an arc, they are not all for the same person. So the answer to Todd's question is it depends. If you are thinking about your career, the book I wrote, Linchpin, is one of my favorites as well, because I think it will wake you up and help you think differently about where you go next. The Dip is the shortest one, and some people tell me it changed their life more than all the other ones put together. The book that I wrote that sold the least is my favorite, the same way all authors have a favorite because they feel underappreciated, is called Survival is Not Enough. It took me 8 hours a day for a year to write that book, and it uses evolutionary theory to explain change. And it might not work for you. Depends on whether you get off on Red Queen theory and all that other stuff. And the reason I wrote the new one, The Practice, is because it's a book for people who don't read my other books. It's a book for people who say, I'm not in business and I'm not a marketer, but I want to make things better.
That's great. Well, I know I certainly have enjoyed The Practice a lot. I'm actually curious, Seth, you were alluding earlier to Bernadette Jiwa, who is a friend of yours and an author that I know that you recommend often. Are there other authors or business thinkers that you get inspired by or that you would recommend that other people check out?
Well, I read a lot of business books, and I can read most of them in 25 minutes because you can skip the even numbered chapters and some of the odd numbered chapters. The business book industry was super important because it was the only interesting wrapper we could use to deliver an idea to people. And it has been largely, I don't want to say replaced, but overshadowed by persistent and consistent blogging and videos from people who don't need to worry about the wrapper, et cetera. So I only make a book when the idea won't leave me alone. Because if I can just make a blog post out of it, I'd rather do that and get back to what I was doing. The list of people who have shown up with ideas that are worth sharing is so long and so important that I'm not even going to say any of their names because I will leave too many people out. What I will say is this: if you are in the right place at the right time, any one of the 1,000 best business books will change your life. And for $20, that's an insane bargain. The important part is being in the right place at the right time. The important part is committing and enrolling in the journey. Because if you just listen to somebody going on, it's not going to change anything for you. And that's one of the reasons why Akimbo, which I don't own anymore, it's independent B Corp, is so important, because they're not books, they're workshops, and people are doing the work. That's what I think I would encourage people on this call to do, is go figure out where can you do the work and who can you do it with. The next time you want to get a business book, start a Zoom club and put 5 people in it and work your way through it with 5 other people, because you will get 10 times more out of that book than you will if you read it on your own.
Great advice, Seth. Thank you. And our time together is winding down. We've covered a lot of wonderful ground here. One thing that I've always been curious about, you have a very distinctive style in your writing. It's short, it's pithy. I will almost call it oracular in some ways. And you're overtly talking about marketing, but also you're talking kind of about life. And I am curious, what goal are you seeking to serve? What is the mission in your head that you are trying to accomplish with the work that you put out there?
Well, it has shifted because I used to be in the book business. So I did 120 books. And a lot of those books were working with authors who needed to demonstrate to the world their point of view and how smart they were. And when I wrote Permission Marketing, I knew more about email marketing than anyone in the world. And I was demonstrating that. That's not what I'm trying to do. What I'm trying to do is help people teach other people. And you're very kind to use the word oracular. You could just say, I write horoscopes, because horoscopes, when they work, are really cool, because the person who reads them takes away so much more than the person who wrote them ever intended. And I've earned trust and enrollment from a bunch of people. I'm super lucky and grateful for that. And I know that they are all smarter than me. And the purpose of one of my books is for someone when they're done to do something I never expected, to make something better than I hoped, and to teach other people something. But we are not any longer, ever again, in a race to collect more facts. Facts are no longer scarce. What we need is enrollment and passion and the commitment to make things better.
So a wonderful note to end on. Seth, thank you very much. If you want to learn more about Seth and his work, including his new book, The Practice, go to sethgodin.com. And if you would like to make sure you never miss one of these interview series and stay in touch with me, you can do so at dorieclark.com. Seth, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Dorie. Thanks to everyone who tuned in. We broke 100. Yay! Be well, everybody.
Thank you, guys.